Hello and welcome to our final Connect Group session where we're looking at our foundational values here at King's Church Aberdeen. And tonight we're going to be looking at the value of loyalty. Now I need to tell you that every building has foundation stones beneath it. In fact, the building that you are now sitting in has foundation stones beneath it. And I'll even tell you that you wouldn't want to be sitting in that building if it didn't have foundation stones. If we look around the world at where bad foundations have been laid, no bigger example do we find in Italy in the town of Pisa. You might be familiar with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Well, the reason that tower is leaning is because of the foundations that were placed there. They were woefully inadequate for the building that was going to be on top of them. And from the moment it was constructed, the building began to lean. In fact, the only reason the building has not fallen over is because they have consistently had to support the building. And at some point, that building will fall down. Because architecturally, all buildings need good foundations. Architecturally, buildings need foundations because of three reasons. Firstly, they need to anchor the structure. Because now and again, extreme natural forces will come along against that building, whether it be a flood or a tornado, and they will come to take down the building, but with good foundations, the building will stand them. Foundations also come to provide a level surface, and if you have a level surface, then you can build adequately and go upwards on top of it. And finally, foundations allow the building to be rooted deeply into the ground. And if they're rooted deeply, then that structure above it will be stable. And it will also mean that there will be no chance it can be overloaded in the future. To me, it sounds like foundation stones we put in buildings are very like the foundational values that we build here at King's. Because if we look what comes against us, we need to have great foundations so that not that natural forces come against us, but when supernatural forces come against us, we won't be swept away. We also need to have a level place in which we can build the kingdom of God here in Aberdeen. And finally, we also need great foundations to go deep down so that King's Church will be a group of stable people who will love their God and love others and show that love to the city and won't get overloaded by it. So foundation stones in a building are very like our foundational values, which we build upon, but which actually don't stay as dead, inanimate stones. Actually, our values are different in that way because they influence our culture. And if they influence our culture, they influence our actions. So tonight, we're going to look at loyalty, that foundational value. We're going to see how it influences our culture and in turn, how it should influence our actions as we live together here at King's Church. So we're going to answer three questions tonight. What is loyalty? Why isn't it important values to us? And actually, how does that influence our actions? So along with humility, maturity, generosity, and community, we have a set of values that we can all look back on and build upon. So let's answer the first question. What is loyalty? Well, everyone has their own frame of reference for loyalty. Maybe you think it's an outdated concept. Maybe you think it's a concept that was set back in the 1800s, Victorian times. It makes me think of a story that is quite famous in Scotland about Greyfriars Bobby, and you might have heard of him. Greyfriars Bobby was a small Skye Terrier, and John Grey was a night watchman in Edinburgh in the 1800s. Sadly, John Grey, after years of walking about the streets of Edinburgh with his small dog, contracted tuberculosis and died, and was buried in Greyfriars Kirkyard. But for 16 years after the death of John Grey, Greyfriars Bobby would go and lay on his grave every day. He became so famous amongst the people of Edinburgh that they would feed him, but every time he would return to his master's grave and sit there. In fact, somebody even erected a statue after his death to commemorate his loyalty. And that statue said, Greyfriars Bobby died 14th of January 1872, aged 16 years, let his loyalty and devotion be a lesson to us all. So maybe your frame of reference is actually loyalty is only reserved for animals or dogs like Bobby or for the 1800s. Or maybe your view of loyalty is more modern day, but slightly different as well. I can guarantee that in your purse or in your wallet, or if like me, in a pocket of your car somewhere, you will find a loyalty card. Yes, you have one. Which one do you have? So I actually have quite a few here. And we call them loyalty cards because we have pledged that we will shop at that shop. We were going to commit to be there. It's a loyalty card. But I have to tell you something, and please don't tell Tesco. I'm actually cheating on Tesco. I don't always go to Tesco. Sometimes I actually go to Aldi. And I think sometimes that's how we can view loyalty, is a bit like our cards, that we dip in and out of it, that loyalty is something we could pick up for a moment when we want to get a benefit. Because loyalty cards aren't about what we can give, they're also about what we can get. And we only go there when we know we're going to get a good deal. So what's your frame of reference for loyalty? Is it something only reserved for animals, or is it more like we see with these loyalty cards we dip in and out of? Well, if we look to Google, or we look to the dictionaries on Google, we find that it says that loyalty is actually an act of faithfulness. It is showing firm and constant support for someone or something. But I think there's another layer to loyalty which is not described in those dictionaries. It is having firm and constant support, but it's more than that. It's actually deep devotion, love, and faithfulness. They're the qualities that we really look for if someone is to be a loyal friend. So the best place for us to go to find a definition of loyalty, of what it truly is to go to the Bible. And actually, when we go to the Bible, we find that the essential definition of loyalty is God Himself. Because His qualities, His nature, and His characteristics are ever faithful. He is loyal in who He is. And we see what that loyalty is and how it's displayed and when we look how God acts towards us, because He is eternally loyal and faithful to us. Firstly, we find that His loyalty is continual. It's continual. It says in Lamentations, and you might have heard this in a different version, but this version in the Passion Translation says it like this: God's loyal love couldn't have run out. His merciful love couldn't have dried up. They're created new every morning. How great is your faithfulness? You know, no matter what, you wake up tomorrow morning, God's faithfulness will be there for you and for me. It doesn't change. There's never going to be a moment when we're going to wake up, when we're going to turn a corner, and God's going to decide that He's not loyal to us, He's not faithful towards us. He is completely in love with us and completely loyal to us. What we also see in the Bible is that God's loyalty is consistent as well as being continual. Timothy is a young man in the New Testament, and Paul writes to him. And in one of his letters, he says to Timothy, do you know, Timothy, even when we are faithless, God is faithful. And Paul also writes to the Hebrews, and he tells them, God has promised you He will never leave you, never, and He will never loosen His grip on your life. Paul kept reiterating the fact that God is consistently faithful and loyal to us. And that's not dependent on how we are. If you have a bad day, God's still faithful to you. If we mess up in our lives, God's still faithful to us. As he said to Timothy, even when we're faithless, even when we don't believe, even when we're struggling, do you know God still loves you and He's loyal towards you? His heart is for you. And I think that's the best evidence and the best definition of what loyalty truly is. It is continual and it is consistent love and deep devotion and faithfulness. So we've answered the first question, what is loyalty? And that tells us a little bit of the way about why it's an important value for us here at King's. But why we've chosen this set of values is because we looked at a section of the Bible that looked at the early church and how they acted together and what they saw happen in their church. And we've discussed it through the other values that we've looked at. So let's turn again to it in the book of Acts in chapter 2, verses 42 to 47, and remind ourselves of this group of believers and what actually happened between them. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and sights performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. And here's the punchline. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Isn't that a wonderful example of a perfect church in a way, a group of people being together? And I love these beautiful words at the beginning. They devoted themselves. They were loyal. They were faithful. They were operating out of love and devotion. So this is our basis for our value. But let's look at actually who or what were they devoted to? Well, firstly, we see that they were devoted to God. Not just to each other, but they were devoted to God. It says they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And you might think, well, that was an easy thing to do. That was an easy place to be devoted to God in. But remember the world that they were in. These people would have known Jesus. They'd watched their friend be hung on a cross. Then they'd watched while he was rose again, and maybe they were still trying to figure that all out, but they knew he'd gone back to be with God the Father, and here they were building a church. But not everybody understood what was happening. They were misunderstood. They were persecuted. Maybe even their friends and family wondered what they were doing, yet in the middle of that, they were not just sticking their toe in the water of faith, but actually they were fully devoted to God. They'd thrown themselves in. I wonder if they remember the words of Jesus when he was responding to the teachers of the law. The Pharisees, or the teachers of the law at the time, came to trick Jesus. They're trying to find out about his knowledge of the Old Testament. They tried to find out what he would say, and then they could pull it up on him afterwards. And they asked him what was the greatest commandment. They knew the Old Testament inside out. They knew the laws that had been laid down, and they wanted to see what he would say. But Jesus, full of godly wisdom, turned to them, and he replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." And we tend to focus on the fact that it is loving God with our heart, our soul, and our mind, everything that we are. But also significant in what he said was that little word, all. All of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind. He was saying, be fully devoted, be all in. In one sentence, he silenced his accusers, but he also reminded them that there is no part-time Christian faith. There isn't any partiality of bits and pieces we pick of Christianity. We need to be all in. It reminded me of a time in my journey of faith when I was a student and I'd made some commitment to Christ, but I was really struggling. I was struggling because of the pride and independence in my own life, and I'd come to Aberdeen and I felt this pull of the love of God on me and what he wanted for my life. But also I wanted to keep some things in my life. I didn't want to let them go. I wanted to do the things I wanted to do. I felt that I would be giving up my freedom that if I couldn't do them. And it really frustrated me. And I remember very clearly praying a very frustrated prayer. And I prayed to God, okay, if you are so convinced that you want me, you've got me. All of me, everything that I am. I'm done with this. I can't be doing it anymore. Do you know that was the best prayer that I ever prayed? And what I found is when I went all in with Jesus, that I didn't lose my freedom, I gained my freedom. But alongside my freedom, I gained joy, and I gained peace, and I gained complete absolution for my sins, which gave me that joy and my peace every day. That was the best prayer I ever prayed. And can I encourage you, if while you're watching or listening to this, you feel like that's you, that you're putting your toe in Christian faith and then you've been pulling it back out again, and you know yourself that your heart's not all in, remember the best prayer I ever prayed was to go all in. And can I encourage you to have a conversation with somebody, probably even God, and go all in for Christian faith. Go all in for Jesus. Go all in for Christ, because you'll never forget it, and in him you will find joy, peace, and freedom. So they were fully devoted to God, but they were also fully devoted to each other. You know, I grew up in a very traditional church, and we met together for an hour every Sunday. And when I look back, it was quite sad really, because I felt that we were just individual people who turned up at a church on a Sunday, maybe smiled at each other, maybe shook each other's hands, but then we left again. And we really weren't connected to each other in any way really. I didn't know what was going on in their lives, and they didn't know what was going on in my family's life. We just were in the same building at the same time, and then we left again. I'm a biology teacher and I teach about ecosystems and the environment. And places in the environment called ecosystems are really healthy and really thriving when they have lots of different connections between the organisms that are there. If there aren't many connections between all of the organisms in the ecosystem, then if something comes along and changes the environment suddenly, that ecosystem can't survive. There's not enough connections. There's not enough ability for them to be able to shift and change and mold when something major happens in that ecosystem. You know, I want Kings to have a thriving church community. And I know to have a thriving church community, it's just like an ecosystem. It needs to have great connections between people, not just people who turn up to be in a building at the same time on a Sunday or any other time. We need to be fully devoted to each other. Over these last 18 months, you know, online and whatever the media team have been doing to help us engage has been fantastic. It has enabled us to keep in contact with each other, and it's also enabled us to receive the word of God and be part of the church community. In fact, I remember speaking to one lady last year and said she'd never felt more connected because she was a single parent. And as a single parent, there were often times that she couldn't be in the building, yet she had the ability to be able to be at prayer meeting or to be able to be at sisterhood. And that's the benefit of being online. And I know for some people still, there is that ability for them to be able to connect in when they aren't able to be in the building with us. However, whenever we have the opportunity, we should make it a priority to be together. This group of people were fully devoted to each other and displaying the value of loyalty. We can do that to some degree online, but not like we can do it when we're together, doing life together, rubbing up alongside each other, chatting to each other, and being able to take that time to find out about each other. In the Old Testament, there's a story about David, who was not yet King David, who was just David. And he had a best friend, and his best friend was called Jonathan, who was King Saul's son. And if you know the story, King Saul kept hating and loving David all at the same time. He was jealous of him, and Jonathan knew this. And Jonathan and David were trying to find out how Jonathan's father felt about David. So they made a plan that they were going to meet together when David was not going to be at the feast with Jonathan. And Jonathan says this line to David as they're discussing this plan. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed because your seat will be empty." You will be missed in King's Church Aberdeen because your seat will be empty. Not in a way because we're looking to build numbers, but actually when you are here, you bring a blessing with you. When you hear, you bring a blessing to others. We never know the blessing that we bring to others. But you know you do. You bring a smile, you bring a conversation, you bring a moment when you ask somebody how they are. That's the blessing that you could be bringing. And you might never know what that blessing is, and not this side of eternity, no. But you are integral to our church community. And when you're not here, your seat will be empty and you will be missed. But it doesn't just bless others. Actually, us being together blesses God's heart. It says in Psalm 101, "My eyes will be on the faithful in the land, that they may dwell with me." I love that God is looking out across his people, just looking to see who's faithful and loyal today, who's showing my heart to others, who's being there and having conversations and showing that they're with people. It blesses God's heart when we show loyalty, when we show devotion to others. And did you know, it doesn't just bless others, it doesn't just bless God's heart, it actually blesses you when we are fully devoted to each other. In Proverbs 28, it says this about the blessing of God. Life's blessings drench the honest and faithful person. I love that word drench, that pouring over. That's just not a little bit of blessing. That's like a waterfall of blessing. So it doesn't just bless others, it doesn't just bless God, but actually it blesses us when we come together as community, we devote ourselves to each other, and we see the blessing on our own life of love and all the goodness that God pours into us through being connected to each other. You know, God cannot help be pleased when we are displaying his very nature of who he is, his love and his devotion through ourselves into the lives of others. And that's why this is such an important value here at King's Church. So, we have an idea of now what loyalty is. We know why it's an important value. So how do we show loyalty? Well, to talk about this, I'd like to take you finally into the Old Testament. And we're going to look at the book of Ruth. A little bit of a backstory to the book of Ruth is there was a man called Elimelech, and he had a wife called Naomi, and they had 2 sons. And they were Israelites, and they lived in the land of Israel. But there was a famine, so instead of trusting God, they decided to go into a neighbouring land, which they shouldn't have done. They went to that neighbouring land, and sadly Elimelech dies, and also the 2 sons die. The 2 sons had got married in this country, so now Naomi, the mother, is left with 2 daughters-in-law. Now, if you think about the culture at that time, they were in a very precarious and very vulnerable situation. It was a very male-dominated society, and they needed the men in their lives. What did they do? Well, Naomi decides to go back to the land that she came from, to go back to her own people. But she speaks to her daughters-in-law and says, look, you don't have to come with me. I understand it's a big burden for you to bear. You're not even from my people. You should go back to your own people and go back to your own land. Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, decides that she will go back. But Ruth, who the book is named after, speaks to Naomi, and this is what she says in Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 to 18. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realised that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And I think this shows 3 examples of what we can do in our own lives to develop that value of loyalty and show it in our culture through our actions. Firstly, what we see in Ruth is unswerving support. Unswerving support. Her words are, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Unswerving support. You know, it might have seemed the obvious choice to go with Naomi, but I think of Ruth and the dreams that she must have had as a young girl before she was married. She probably thought she would get married and stay in the country where she was with her husband. They would grow and they would have children, and there they would be together for the rest of their lives. I don't ever think that this was her dream of going back to a country she'd never been to before with her mother-in-law. Yet something had changed within Ruth. Maybe it was the stories that Naomi told her of her God. Maybe it was the nature of her mother-in-law as she'd seen her and been with her all that time. But inside of her had grown this loyalty and devotion to Naomi to say, no, I'm actually going to go where you go. You know, we all have our agendas and we all have our own opinions. I know I do. But sometimes we have to lay those down and say, actually, where we're all going together, that's where I'm going to go. And if we stop for a moment, that's where I'm going to stop. Sometimes in community, we need to set our own priorities aside and actually look to God and say, okay, God, if we're in this together, I trust you for my future, but I want to go with everybody. Loyalty and devotion starts with us unswerving support, not taking our own criteria forward first, but actually looking to see what God is doing and look what everybody else is doing to build the kingdom of God and go with them at that time. Secondly, on top of unswerving support, we see unconditional love from Ruth. She says a very simple statement: your people will be my people. She is completely turning from who she is in her own culture. She's actually saying, I'm actually not going to be Moabite anymore, but actually your people, your family, everybody who is important to you, they are going to be important to me. In community, I don't think we ever have the option to say, do you know, they're just not my type of people. And as I say that, I know that I have said that at times. Oh, well, I'm sure they're really nice, but they're just not my type of people. I have to change my actions and my thoughts to say, if they're God's people, they're my type of people. And everybody is a child of God. Just some of them just don't know it yet. I have to learn, and I think we all have to learn, to see people through God's eyes. And Ruth in that moment was saying, actually, Naomi, I'm going to embrace everybody as you embrace them. I'm not going to look at them as different. I'm not going to look at them as scary. I'm actually going to say, your people will be my people. I remember a long time ago when I was helping at a kids' camp down in Northumberland, and there was a girl I knew there, and when I first met her, in my head I said, do you know, she's just not my type of person. She was quite scary and she was quite abrupt and to the point, and I thought, I just know we won't be friends. I did 2 lots of camp, and Ruth became one of my best friends, and we kept up a long time after I helped at those kids' camps. You know, our own insecurities, our own biases sometimes make us say, they're not my type of people. Yet with the heart of God and the love of Jesus, we can say, actually, God, if they're your type of people, they're my type of people, and we can show unconditional love to others. Unswerving support, unconditional love, and finally, unchanging care. I love the fact that Ruth said right at the end, do you know, nothing is going to separate us. It's not going to change. We are going to be together in this. Unchanging care. Such an action brought out through loyalty to Naomi. She says, even if death is not going to separate us, I am going to be here with you. You know, so many things can come and try and separate people, try and tear them apart. There's a piece in the Bible that talks about the little foxes that try and get in to destroy things. Little foxes of gossip, little foxes of discontent in people's lives, little foxes that come in and try and whisper into our ears. It's so important that we make a stand and say, actually, I'm going to have unchanging care for my God and unchanging care for others. I'm going to show that loyalty no matter when I don't feel great about things, no matter when I feel a little bit offended. Actually, I'm not going to make that change what I say and who I am. I'm going to be loyal in my actions and my words to others. It doesn't mean everybody always gets everything right, but the first person we should always take it to is God, and let Him heal our hearts rather than try and find healing in other places. Unswerving support, unconditional love, and unchanging care are all actions that we can try and act out in our community together. And what's the result of that devotion? What's the result if we change some things in our own lives? Well, spoiler alert, I'm going to take you to the end of Ruth, and I'm afraid I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ending. But don't worry if you've never read it before. Go and read the middle of it. It's wonderful and there's still some great stuff in. But right at the end of Ruth, it gives you the end picture of what happens. Remember, we started off with Naomi and 2 daughters-in-law, and here's how we end up. So Boaz, who is Ruth's future husband, took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord," that's the women of the town, "who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women who lived there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of King David. Isn't that wonderful, this picture at the end, that God brought 2 things through the blessing of loyalty. He brought restoration. Naomi and Ruth were restored to a family. She was given a son. She had provision. She had safety. But as well as that, it says that her life was renewed. She was given hope. She was given fresh purpose and a future and vision. I would love for King's Church Aberdeen, and I fully believe is who we're meant to be, as a place where people come and find restoration, and they find their life renewed and find hope again. And I believe part of our duty and obligation for us is to stand on that foundation of loyalty and let it influence our culture and our actions, and we will see restoration and renewal in this city and beyond. Thank you for listening tonight, and I hope you enjoy your discussion on the value of loyalty.